in Translation talk show, the talk show that stacks truth on politics and today's hottest news headlines from a diverse perspective. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. For our radio audience, you're listening to WPPM LP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, people-powered media. And thank you, of course, as always, to our podcast listeners going 330 episodes strong. You're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you can download a podcast. We always appreciate our podcast community. Continue the conversation on social media, at Ray's Podcast on Twitter, at Ray's Latino Talk on Instagram, and you can always email me, podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. On this episode of Found in Translation, you'll hear the audio of this week's Latinos Work for Climate Change Forum that took place in Phoenix this week, featuring Congressman Ruben Gallego and a great panel of Latino environmental leaders in the Southwest. Shout out to the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Unidos U.S. Action Fund for organizing a very fascinating and fruitful conversation between activists and also business owners and workforce and employees, employers, and just people that want to work for climate change, install solar panels, work on electric vehicles, work to build public transportation grid, work in various industries to support the environmental movement and also build up our local economies. Later on in the show, I will also reveal the best things you will hear this week, and we'll pour out a few brews during our Stackin' 20 segment. Before we hear from Congressman Gallego and other friends on how to engage Latinos in the climate change movement, the latest on President Trump's behavior and what we need to do in response. Since we last spoke, it's just been days. The president has continued his attacks against people of color in our democracy. First, he mocked Puerto Rico for simply being in the path of Hurricane Dorian. He announced potentially denying birthright citizenship to children born abroad to service members, our government employees, and as I commented on my friend Jennifer Duran's Facebook page, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Finalized this tour of terror by diminishing American influence on the global stage with an embarrassing and treasonous performance at the G7. It felt much more like the G6 plus a fool, and in doing so, minimized the environmental catastrophe taking place in the Amazon forests of Brazil, being orchestrated, of course, by his South American impersonator, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Oh, yeah, and he told government employees to break the law by potentially taking landowners' rights away to build some wall along the southern border. That sounds like a high crime and misdemeanor to me. And all the while still torturing children and now threatening to deport gravely ill ones. You talk about heartless. In short, an international embarrassment, a direct threat to people of color, and a clear asset of the Russian government. I don't rattle off this list to scare you. You already should be frightened. I share this list because we cannot minimize each and every incident, because that is not only normalizing President Trump's behavior, but it hides the long-term effects on our country and our world. Look, even if you don't care about racism, which you should be concerned that the G7 is unraveling in front of our eyes, and our traditional allies are developing strategies amongst themselves and amongst China and other countries to collaborate without us. This makes us more vulnerable from both a military and economic perspective. But for those that care about racism, you should. His racism makes us more vulnerable to violence, discrimination, bullying, dehumanization. And I, for one, refuse to let anyone talk about Puerto Ricans or treat immigrants or treat anyone this way, the way this man is treating us every single day. This country's mine as much as it is any of his disillusioned supporters. And we have to now show the world how we're going to take our country back. We have to hold him. We have to impeach him. Congress needs to impeach him. We have to vote out not only the president, but every complicit member of Republican in Congress. We have to shame his donors for funding white supremacy. Don't support their businesses. Shame these people. Embarrass them. Call them out. Expose them for who they are. People that are funding white supremacy in an anti-American agenda. And collectively, we all, and I point to myself first, we all need to work together to shut down these camps and stop the torture of human beings using our federal tax dollars. We must have the courage to save our democracy and stand up to this menace. Let's hear from Congressman Ruben Gallego and a panel of experts from the Latinos Work for Climate Change Forum in Phoenix, Arizona a few days ago, and I'll be back to share the best things you'll hear this week on the Found in Translation talk show.
So to begin our conversation, I would like to introduce the president of the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Monica Villalobos, to give us a welcome.
Thank you so much, Iris. I am going to use my soccer mom voice. I am very proud to let you know that I have 2 yellow cards, so I feel like you should all be able to hear me in the back of the room. Thank you again so much to Iris and ABC 15 for lending your wonderful talents and knowledge and expertise to our panel, as well as all of our panelists, of course, and also to the Better Business Bureau. We've partnered with them. We are now housed here. After this, we invite you to come and visit us right next door at the Ignite co-working space. For us at the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the whole idea and concept and everyday practice of climate change is absolutely critical. We know that our Latino population is already predisposed to caring for the earth, to caring for our planet, and being able to be a part of this is really important to us. As you know, I love the data, I love the numbers. One of the things that we know from the 2018 Latino Air Report is that 8 out of 10 Latinos in the U.S. believe that climate change is absolutely critical and important in the United States. However, only 7 out of 10 Latinos reported that they had never been contacted by anybody regarding climate change. So 7 out of 10 have never been contacted to discuss this issue. And that's why it's so important for us to be able to do that. So with that said, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a good friend of the Arizona Hispanic Chamber, Congressman Ruben Gallego, who's with us today. He represents Arizona's 7th Congressional District and is a member of the House of Representatives Natural Resources Committee. Please help me welcome him with a big round of applause.
Well, can you hear me? Well, thank you, Monica, for that introduction. Thank you to Unidos US, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and everyone that is attending here today to talk about this very important issue. First of all, we know climate change is real because I'm not wearing a suit right now. So, general rule, though, I think the general rule should always be in Arizona from June till Labor Day, suits and formal wear in general should be optional, especially among familia. But that's just my general note. Number 2, one of the things that I've been in politics or in policymaking now for almost 15 years. And 15 years ago, we were talking about the eventual consequences of climate change and what it would mean. That was futuristic speak. We actually are no longer in that futuristic speak. We are now talking about climate change. It is happening right now. And many of you that have been here even longer than I in Arizona can actually feel the difference. When I first got here, the nights were much cooler than they are now. Now it gets hot and it stays hot. I remember some great monsoons that used to come down and cool down the city. I have yet to see one major monsoon this summer right now. What we were dependent on for many years to make this place a livable, sustainable city is no longer occurring. So we as leaders really do have to figure out what is happening and how to fix it, but also how we as a Latino community can benefit from it, right? While we are going to be the largest victims, I think, of climate change because of circumstances, number 1, because of our population density, number 2, because the poorer you are, the less ways you can do to mitigate for climate change. So the richer you are, you can move away. You can buy a better air conditioning system. You could insulate your house better. The poorer you are, the chances of you being able to mitigate against that is going to be very expensive or cost prohibitive to the point that you don't use it. At the same time, we are the workforce of the future. in this state. Actually, not of the future. We are the workforce in this state right now. We are the people that are going to be putting up the solar panels. We are the companies that are going to be selling the solar panels. We are the companies that are going to do the insulation in these houses. And while there is climate change happening and there are viable steps that we can do to help that situation, there is a way for us, I think, as a community to profit from it. But we do need, in my opinion, forward-looking leaders to do that. And to give credit, especially to the business community here in Arizona, especially the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the affiliates of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and ASU and our nonprofits, they have accepted that climate change is real and that we have to actually do steps to mitigate for that. The one thing that you are lacking, in my opinion, is a forward-looking government, especially at the state and federal level. And I could take some blame for that too. We need to make sure climate change is a policy agenda, much like infrastructure is for the Hispanic community. When we think about housing in the next 20 to 30 years, we also have to incorporate the ideas of mitigating climate change into that. When we start thinking about water and water infrastructure, we also have to think about climate change and how it affects our ability to draw water either from Colorado River, from our aquifers, or for us to be able to use recycled water. And our politicians need to start looking at climate change just as much as they look at our utilities, just as much as they look at your roads, because it will affect everything. It will affect everything. Right now, there are so many restrictions on the books, and some policy and some companies here that actually try to work with the government can talk about this. There are so many restrictions on the books about what we can do and what we can't even legislate. If the city of Phoenix, which has a very progressive city council and a city population that voted to keep light rail yesterday, congratulations to everyone who voted for that, wanted to actually impose regulations, for example, for low flow water systems on new home builds, or wanted to mandate better insulations for new home builds, the state of Arizona has said that there's no new home regulations that cities and municipalities are allowed to do without the express permission of the state, right? So even though you have governments and local governments that tend to be the most responsive to the needs of its people, the state government, because of certain special interests, have decided that that is not going to be allowed. That is a very dangerous situation. We need to make sure that the local, the state, and the federal are all working hand in hand, and obviously working with our nonprofits and our community businesses that are really trying to adapt and profit from what's coming with climate change. So in my role, we do a lot of work now, especially on the Natural Resources Committee. As chairman of the Indian Affairs Committee, we're finding that a lot of our Native American brothers and sisters, their communities are even more impacted by climate change. The Navajo Nation, for example, was already very much impacted by water scarcity, and with this incoming long periods of droughts, they're going to have even more problems. We're seeing that I was just up in Washington State talking to a couple of tribes that are dependent on salmon, and they have been for thousands of years. And they believe in the next 10 years that they're not going to even be able to hunt or gather salmon anymore, because the salmon are starting to die off because the water is too hot. And once that happens, that tribe doesn't even know what to do, because they've basically were born around the idea of being salmon gatherers. Their whole economy is based on gathering salmon. So what happens when the salmon disappears? So this is the kind of challenges that we're dealing at the federal level, and we're going to continue to be dealing for the next 30, 40, and to 100 years. Arizona is going to be at the forefront of that. And we can continue to either be the victim or to be the person that actually takes a hold of our future. Right now, for example, 6% of our energy right now is from solar generation, which is number 2 in the country, to give us some credit. But we could be doing a lot more than that. We could be doing a lot more than that, making sure that we're helping fight climate change, employing a base of workers that know how to deal with that, and at the same time bringing some good positive change, I think, to this whole state. So I really am glad that you guys are having this conversation. I thank you for having me here, at least to speak about it, and I'm glad that you guys are going to continue to come up with solutions, because this is something that impacts us tremendously in a negative way, but we can figure out a way for us to succeed as a community in regards to this kinds of challenges. So thank you again.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Gallego. We really appreciate you being here today. All right, well, we will now continue with remarks from our panel. Our first panelist is Gloria Montano of the Advocacy Director for CHISPA, Arizona. She will discuss what's at stake for Arizona in the climate change debate and the work that CHISPA is doing to engage Latinos in environmental advocacy. Gloria, welcome. Great. You can stand here. That would be ideal. If you don't
Thank
care.
you. Buenas
Look at
tardes.
that.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes.
Buenas
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, guys. Gloria Montano. I'm the Advocacy Director with CHISPA, Arizona. We have been around in the Arizona area since 2014. We are a program of legal conservation voters. What we do is we work to elevate Latino voices via grassroots organizing on addressing climate change and environment. Our areas of focus are to make sure we advocate for clean energy, clean air, for public lands, and making sure that democracy and access are there. Climate change is real. Everybody said it, right? I'm going to give you guys no offense to any reporters, but I was having a conversation with a reporter last year, and we were talking about why CHISPA Arizona was involved in the climate change. And I was actually point blank asked by a reporter that said, Latinos care about the environment? And I said, very much so. And in fact, when you poll them, they overwhelmingly support and understand climate change needs to be addressed. We are innately, for people that are concerned about the environment, right? Like our parents always said, cuida eso, right? Cuida eso. How many of you have gone to a refrigerator and there's not butter in the butter container? Right? Right? We believe in reduce, reuse, and recycle. And we also understand in every single family conversation that I've ever been in or I've ever been a part of or heard from, everybody always complain like, this is not the summer, this is not the way that things used to be. So the issue is how do you move that conversation and that base of knowledge and what we are very much at our core into policy? It means first you have to invite the conversation. I'm going to take a little personal point of privilege. I just came back from Tucson. CHISPA Arizona does election work, and I know this is a nonpartisan thing, but we just got help to get a primary winner in Tucson who prioritized that climate change needs to be the front. Regina Romero, right? But what she is she's historic because she's the first Latina. She'll be the first female mayor in Tucson. Tucson's entire history. How many of you guys know that Tucson is the most progressive, well, one of the most progressive, sorry, flag staff as well, right? Right states, and like that history had to get made in 2019 is amazing and also sad. But what she led was climate change. Unabashedly, like unapologetically climate change. Because our communities are being felt by it, right? Tucson is 3 degrees hotter than it was 20 years ago. Phoenix is 2 degrees hotter than it was 20 years ago, right? Our skies are dirty. Maricopa County is in the top 10 of worst air pollution. And when you look at the density and the population of where it's serving, it's along the I-17 south of 10 corridor here, which means communities of color are the places that are first at it. We knew about it in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s because that's where we were having our corridors of industrial. And we realized that we never really addressed those problems. We've all heard about environmental racism over our decades in our lives, right? And usually we think about it in TCE and water supplies and what's in the item. But it's now going not just what's in the dirt, not just what's in the ground, but now what's in the air. And so we need to have to address it. So we are here to say Latinos care about the environment. It's important as an issue as education, economy, and immigration. And in fact, it's completely intersectional, right? Latino children have higher rates of asthma. They have less access to medical care for it. Why do they have higher rates of asthma? Air pollution, right? Which is one of the factors of climate change. And if you are not going to school and education, in Arizona, 50%, more than 50% of our students are Latino, and we are going to have higher rates of absenteeism due to asthma, which is a cause of climate change. It is an impact and a concern we have. It's a public health access, right? My kids have asthma. My mom's like, ¿qué es eso? Right? Like, how many parents, like, in the generation, this is a new concept that we are treating. And so it's also a cultural shift that we have to do. And that's how we connect to it. The other is the pocketbook issue, right? Renewable energy was a huge debate in Arizona last year. People hated the proposition or loved the proposition, but they all liked the concept of increasing renewable and solar energy and clean energy. It polled well. It still polls well. And when you ask Republicans, Democrats, Latinos, non-Latinos, they understand we need to harness the energy that constantly touches us every day. And then they also are beginning to understand, right? That's the energy part of it, but it's our pocketbook issue. More and more trends throughout the country are showing when you do solar energy plus battery, it's cheaper. What it does is it takes away the profit from the corporation. We need to be first in line as a community, our taxpayers, our pocketbooks. So those are the issues of it. Now, we at CHISPA believe all levels of government have responsibility to address climate change. We are very proactive in a campaign called the Clean Buses for Healthy Niños, and that we are working with school districts to be able to remind them, we specifically did it with the VW settlement, but those that have school bus money is to be able to convert to clean buses. And clean buses are electric buses. Electric buses mean no emission. Diesel is not clean diesel. If you guys ever want to read something, get scared, or watch something, Hard Knocks on Netflix, and it'll tell you about the VW scandal, and you'll be very scared about diesel. And now you understand why. When you look at the cost of it and the impact of it, right, it is a cost-benefit analysis. So local schools can have sustainability, but one of the solutions they can even think about doing is their school buses to be able to remove some of the emissions they're putting in the air. At the statewide, at the local level, right, like I said, we just worked to get Regina Romero elected. One of the reasons why is she led with climate change. She led with water conservation and water supply, and understanding that you need to make decisions at the local level, solar panel. Sustainability is a major issue here in the city of Phoenix. They're working on desert heat islands. There's a desert heat island issue coming in. We need to be protecting it to make sure we're getting shade, we're getting trees, and our communities are not being ignored. This is not an affluent issue. If we do not stand up for it, and we do not prioritize it, and we do not remind elected officials, members of Congress, our U.S. senators specifically, because we really need to work on those senators, that they need to take those action, and is as important as economic and how much they get paid, we will fall behind. So those are the local issues. At the state level, you have the legislature, you have the Salt River Project, and you have the Arizona Corporation Commission. The Arizona Corporation Commission is currently considering whether they have to do a mandate to utility companies that they oversee to make sure that they have renewable energy. Right now, we just heard, right? The congressman just said 6% comes from solar. The last time that the Arizona Corporation Commission put a renewable energy standard in front on top of the utilities was before iPhones were invented. Technology has advanced significantly since then. Our renewable energy standard should be higher, and it should make sure. So we are advocating for 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. That's at the state level that needs to happen, and SRP, who has their own respective governing board, needs to follow suit. And at the federal level, we need to make sure. Right now there's a logjam. Thank you for your work, Congressman, and for those from congressional offices, but we need to do a little bit more, and we actually need to do action. We cannot be ignoring it. We need to push back. Climate change is real, but climate facts are not being incorporated in our policy. So we need to do that. The House has passed H.R. 9, right, which is to make sure that the United States stays in the Paris Climate Agreement. The Senate needs to pass a very similar version, and both of our senators need to support that and move forward. There's also a resolution to make sure to recognize what climate change is doing. Those are actions, but those are outlines and guidance on how the U.S. government should be thinking about and incorporating it in every one of their departments, be it Department of Interior, be it a Department of Commerce, or be it at Department of Education. All layers of government need to have it, because this isn't going to be a one-shot solution. Getting 50% renewable energy by 2030 is not going to fully solve it. We need to change our culture and change our lives. And then also there's a new bill coming up called the Clean Energy for All, which is being introduced by Representative McEachin, who will be introducing it in a couple weeks. And that really is looking to make sure that we have clean energy by 2050 at the national level. And so what it does, it specifically also makes sure to be thinking about communities of color. Because a lot of policies that we've been hearing are things that are like policymakers and rooms that aren't being touched to our community, right? Carbon taxes are great. carbon, whatever, charging people for like their bad, offsetting your footprint are solutions. Well, why don't we actually just reduce our carbon impact, right? Instead of being, if you're wealthy enough, you can say, I'm sorry, and pay it off. We need to be able to change the way we do, leverage technology, and be able to realize that the trend in the future of technology is that it's affordable and it's clean for our community. So the reality is, what can you do? And that's the whole thing. It's like, what can you do? The issue is you need to show up. I have shown up in many congressional meetings to talk about environment, and people are floored that a brown woman is talking to them. That should not be the case. They should realize, as much as they think I can talk about immigration and immigration policy and immigration reform, that I can ask for energy, environment, and public lands reform. Because these are things that we care. Es tema que nos pertenece, and the less that we remove ourselves from it, the less that they will remember that those actions and those things that we need to get done for our community. Because otherwise, they're only going to talk to us immigration. And immigration is impacted by climate change. If any of you are volunteering with these families that are building these fires, many of them will tell you they can no longer go to the jobs that they used to have because there's no water, their community didn't recover from a hurricane, or their community is receding. So every issue that you care about, this is truly intersectional and not just a buzzword, and you need to make sure to include it in every lobbying or every ask that you make of an elected official. So thank you guys very much. If you want to learn more about CHISPA Arizona, Arizona, we ask you to join us at chispaaz.org and sign our pledge, and so we can be able to get you on our email list. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gloria. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. I don't think I need to tell you that the climate change conversation is especially critical to Arizona's future. You've heard it from our speakers here this afternoon, and you're going to continue to hear it today. And of course, I'm going to throw out some of the weather facts for you that, again, as Congressman Gallego mentioned too, if you've lived here long enough, you're feeling it. You're feeling the difference. According to the according to the Environmental Defense Fund, heat wave days in Arizona are expected to triple by 2050. We are aware of the extreme heat. We're feeling it today. As of yesterday, we are at 27 days of highs at 110 or higher. The most we've ever seen in a single year is 33 days. So this trend is continuing. We're feeling it on a daily basis. So you can imagine the potential consequences this trend will have on our health and our overall quality of life. So again, another important reason why we're having these conversations. So I would like to now introduce Sandy Whitley of the Citizens Climate Lobby. Whitley is here to share with us how we can all get involved in direct advocacy on behalf of climate change issues in Arizona. Sandy.
Whitley. I am a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm going to talk to you about grassroots engagement. Thank you all for inviting me here today. First of all, CCL was founded 12 years ago by a man who saw Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, and it made him very worried about global warming. So he started doing talks to people about how to be good environmental citizens, LED light bulbs and walking and biking more, driving less. And then he saw that oil companies were receiving millions of dollars in subsidies from the government, and he knew what was really needed was grassroots contact with members of Congress to convince them to take action on climate change. It would take a lot of changing light bulbs to make up for those millions in subsidies. So Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, volunteer grassroots organization with a singular mission. And we've already heard people talk about carbon fee. Our goal is to get Congress to pass a revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend policy. This is but one solution to the climate crisis we face, albeit a very important one, that would accelerate the effectiveness of all of the other solutions that are out there. It would reduce carbon in the atmosphere by 40% in 12 years and 90% by 2050. We've heard some other years put out there too. We all have the same goals here. We're all on the same planet. We breathe the same air. But what I want to talk about more is how to get more community members involved in organizations that are working to make and keep our world livable. I used to say I was working on global warming for my grandchildren, but now I say I'm working on it for my children and for me and for my community. And the reason is that we are seeing and hearing about the adverse effects of global warming almost daily. 2 years ago, there was very little in the news about climate change. Then there was a spate of hurricanes and floods and fires, and that caused a lot of damage. That same year, small planes couldn't get off the ground at Sky Harbor Airport. While we cannot say that climate change was the direct cause of these adverse weather events, we know that it increased the severity and the intensity and the frequency. And incidentally, in 2017, the year of those extreme weather events, it cost more than $306 billion in damages, and so we're all paying for that. We see grassroots engagement as a powerful motivator for climate action. So in Arizona, we're lucky to not have hurricanes. Floods are rare. We do have fires. There was just one in the Superstition Wilderness a few months ago. We have had some very big ones in the past, but what Arizona did have in 2018 is 128 days over 100 degrees. That's 35% of a year. We also had 172 people who died from extreme heat, and it was the 19th year of a severe drought. So these are things that affect us all right here, right now, and to get people engaged in climate action, they need to see how climate change can affect them directly and personally. We need to think about how we are affected locally. We know that Latinos are on the front lines of global warming. Construction and farming and other outdoor work all draw heavily on Latino workers. They are at greater risk when working in extreme conditions and can develop health issues. Somebody already mentioned Hispanic children are 70% more likely to be hospitalized for asthma than others. Many Latinos lack health insurance. It's all under the same umbrella, the issue. So climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe says the best thing that we can do about climate change is to talk about it. And that seems like a simple thing to do, right? But we don't do that very much. It's not happening to the degree it needs to be happening. Probably because people don't know how to start conversations and do not feel knowledgeable enough to speak about global warming, even if they are worried about it. So she suggests that we start with talking about our shared values. These are things that we all have a stake in. For example, we all want a safe place to live that's free of pollution in the air. We want clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, enough food to eat, a healthy body to run and play and enjoy life with, and a healthy economy where we can us and our kids get jobs. So what we need to ask ourselves is, what do people care about? What makes them tick? I am a nurse, and I care about keeping people healthy. And the more I learned about how pollution affects every system in our body, the more I knew I needed to educate people about the potential adverse health effects of global warming pollution. So we need to talk about what is value to us. We also need to talk about what steps can be taken, because we all need to feel like we are a part of the solution. So there's many things that can be done on a personal level. For example, changing those light bulbs, recycling, eating less meat, plant-based diets. We can do things on a community level as well. Join an organization to learn more about the issues, and feel more comfortable in talking to your peers and family and friends about climate issues. Also, on a community level, we can participate in community gardens, join climate marches. So in summary, we need to talk about climate change. People need to understand there is an issue and how it could affect them directly. Latino-owned businesses could focus attention on energy, education, including jobs in clean energy and the environment. Speak to your networks about the issue, motivate action, let them know what can be done. There's church groups and clubs, a lot of people that we can talk to just keep educating. And you can certainly contact local organizations like CCL to educate your groups about climate change. And we welcome the opportunity to increase our volunteer base. We'd like to have more people of color as CCL volunteers, because our choices today will certainly impact what happens in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Ruben Gallego, Gloria Montano of Green, Sandy Whitley, and Iris Hermosillo for their comments during this week's Latinos Work for Climate Change Forum. Wanted to share the two best things you're going to hear this week. It's going to be really exciting stuff. First of all, an Oklahoma judge ordered pharma giant Johnson & Johnson to pay $572 million, or some of us say $500 million, for its role in the opioid crisis in a historic ruling on Monday. This marks the first time a major opioid manufacturer has been deemed responsible in court and made to pay damages. This decision took place after two other pharmaceutical companies, Purdue Pharma, the makers of oxycodone, or as they say in the street, Oxy, and Teva, settled out of court with the state of Oklahoma. It could have implications, a whole bunch of lawsuits on the state level all over the country. I mean, a couple of these pharma, if they don't settle quick out of court, a couple of these pharmaceutical companies may be out of business. This is really going to potentially transform the pharmaceutical industry. You know, I got to give the Republican State Attorney General of Oklahoma, Mike Hunter, a ton of credit. He's doing what more of us need to do. He's focusing on the big picture. What are the root of our problems? We're, instead of pouring a ton of resources to lock up petty drug dealers, incarcerating people afflicted with drug addiction, he's focusing on the root of the problem. And in this case, when we talk about what's happened with the opioid addiction, it's pharma's influence to flood the market with addictive medicines, and until now, without accountability. The biggest drug dealer hurting your family is that Rite Aid on the corner, that CVS down the block, and the Walgreens around the way. Holding pharma accountable for the harm they have caused is a great start. Now we need to hold accountable. Let's think big picture. What are the root of our problems? Let's hold accountable the companies running private detention facilities or paying virtually no federal taxes, which is ramping up the federal debt, or even luring undocumented labor to work for them. They're turning around to seemingly invite federal authorities to deport their own workers without regard to their children, their families, their community, because they fought against unjust labor practices. Don't get distracted by the distractions set up by the biggest thugs in our society. Great thing you're going to hear this week. Shout out to Regina Romero, a councilwoman in Tucson, Arizona, the first Latina on city council in Tucson. She defeated two Democratic challengers in the primaries this week in Arizona to become the party's mayoral candidate and be in position to potentially become the first Latina and first woman to serve as the city's mayor. You kind of don't think a lot about Tucson. It's sort of in an odd corner in the state near the southern border, and it's sort of the little sister to the big city of Phoenix. Tucson's a major city. Tucson's as big as Baltimore. I mean, it's a big city. So this is a major accomplishment from Regina. She would not only be the first Latina elected city council, she's also a favorite to win in November. What's really interesting about Romero, she very much ran as an environmental champion as much as anything. She was recently working as the director of Latino engagement for the Center of Biological Diversity. Want to shout out our friends at CHISPA, a Latino environmental advocacy organization. They really threw down and invested some major resources to support the candidacy and turn out Latino voters in that Tucson in that election. So we're working together. We're really making some moves together. So shout out to Regina Romero, and we wish her the best in November from not only the perspective of Latino activists, but people that care about the environment. Speaking of the environment, let's get back to excerpts from this week's Latinos Work for Climate Change Forum, which took place in Phoenix a few days ago. You're going to hear excerpts from the comments of Coconino County Supervisor Liz Archuleta. You talk about a rising star. Great to work with her. And Victor Contreras of Chicanos por la Causa, another great advocate, about how they're engaging Latinos not only in the climate change movement, but the clean energy workforce. And I'll come back to pour a few out in our Stacking 20 segment.
The work to address climate change and the development of the green economy takes place on a federal, state, county, and also on local levels, as we've been discussing. So to share more about the work taking place on a county level to engage Latinos in climate change solutions and the green workforce, I'm honored here to introduce Coconino County Supervisor Elizabeth Archuleta.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here this afternoon and for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion and presentation. I'm going to talk about climate change and give a real example of what we've experienced up in Coconino County. And so in northern Arizona, we have felt the effects of climate change through drought, through increasing temperatures, through shorter winters with decreased snowfall, through tree mortality due to bark beetles, which is due to dry climate conditions and thick strands of trees competing for limited resources and water, and wildfire and post-wildfire flooding. So many of you are probably very familiar with the beautiful northern part of the state and our forests and all the recreational opportunities and public lands that we have in the county, and they're a significant economic driver. Our economy up north is based on a tourism economy and an outdoor economy. And in regard to Latino communities, my family, along with several other Hispanic pioneer families who came to Coconino County 5 generations ago and to northern Arizona, they worked in the forest-related industry. The timber industry, the sawmills, and the railroad were the industries that brought Latinos and African Americans to northern Arizona. And so Latinos have had a very strong connection, not only through the workforce, but through a cultural connection to the land. They've worked the land, they've lived off the land through hunting, fishing, wood gathering, and really recreating in the outdoors. In fact, some of my fondest memories as a kid was when my family used to go out and do wildlife watching, go through the forest, and also picking piñones. If I don't know how many people have had piñons. But in my district 10 years ago, in 2010, we had the Schultz Fire. This is the Schultz Fire. The photo doesn't really do it justice. It was a deep, deep red. The entire mountain was on fire. And this forest had not been thinned. There was overgrowth, there were thickets, small, thin diameter trees, and a significant understory creating forest fuels and causing this very high intensity burn on this mountain. Just a matter of 8 weeks ago, we had the museum fire, and that's looking north from Flagstaff downtown. The museum fire was in July, and of course, ABC covered it significantly. You probably heard all about that on our San Francisco peaks threatening Flagstaff. So this map just shows the Schultz fire burn area again on the San Francisco peaks as well. And the Schultz affected neighborhoods, you can see those 2 squares there at the base of the mountain and the watersheds. The museum fire, which was right on the mountain above Flagstaff, and the impacted floodplain there, and that is a very dense neighborhood that I'll talk a little bit more about here. So the Schultz fire in 2010 was a 15,000 acre fire. To contain it, it cost $9.4 million. The floods that resulted because of the fire having this very high intensity burn on a mountain and flooding where we never had flooding before, but where monsoon rains came and flooded the entire area, cost almost $50 million. Total economic cost for Schultz fire was $133 to $147 million. You can see the museum fire, a fairly small fire compared to Schultz, but again, $9 million just to contain that. Flood mitigation costs to date, just with sandbags, jersey barriers, and some other mitigation to protect homes and lives, $1.45 million. And the total economic cost, well, we're not sure yet because we haven't had any flooding. In fact, on my way down here, I got several texts saying it's flooding, it's hailing, it's raining, it's hailing, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the flooding. So, and these are both in my district. And so in the Schultz fire, we had the fire in June, and 2 weeks later, when the fire was after the fire was contained, 2 weeks later after the fire, we had flash flooding. That resulted in the death of a 12-year-old girl. Probably one of the most difficult things I've done in my entire political career is being with parents and having to tell the community that we lost a 12-year-old girl to flooding. The interior flooding of approximately 85 homes, but that was just interior flooding. We had over 1,500 homes that received property damage, that had water either inside their garage or their accessory structures. The city of Flagstaff had their water line was destroyed, one of their water lines, which was over a $4 million damage that was done, and 20% of their city's water supply was cut off. We had 23 flood events the very first summer and 20 flood events the following summer. So people got pummeled by the floods. There's 8 watersheds that come off of this mountain, specifically in the Schultz flood burn area. So you can imagine the amount of destruction that came with all of the water, the debris, the ash, boulders that were 4 feet in diameter, just devastating flooding. So when you look at the impact of the Schultz fire and flooding, as I mentioned, the cost was $133 to $147 million. It was prepared by NAU, the Ecological Restoration Institute, to really try to quantify what was the actual cost, not just of suppression of the fire, not of just of flood mitigation, but the total cost to the community. And that was the dollar amount. Now, I bring this up because right now the conversation about the wildfires and forest restoration is something that we need to do as a state and out in the West. This is the big wildfire is the largest threat that the West faces, and yet we're not putting funding to promote this forest restoration. We need to be able to do that. We can't continue to have our forests be our Forest Service be fire suppression department. We have to be able to put money on the front end and be able to thin our forests and make sure that they're healthy. So, the 2 wildfires impacted the Latino community significantly by impacting our tourism-based economy, which in northern Arizona, as I mentioned, is a significant economy and employs a significant number of Latinos. Also, our quality of life, our ability to do the hunting, the recreating, to sell wood for extra income, to gather wood to heat our homes, and also our quality of life. And many people who have just recently have been impacted by the museum fire and will be impacted by the flooding, I've been telling them, go out and buy flood insurance. It's really important so you can make a claim when you get flooded. Well, so many people in the community, in the Latino community, who are at the base of this mountain where we have most of our Latino community, my neighborhood, the Sunnyside neighborhood, have been telling me, Liz, we can't afford it. It's $500 up front or $1,000 up front that you have to pay in full for flood insurance. So what's going to happen? It's going to be the Latino community that's most vulnerable and it's going to be impacted by the flooding. And they're going to be most at risk of losing their homes. So when you think about what is causing the majority of the flooding, well, this is a picture of the forest, and this is what happens as the water comes off the mountain. It makes these cuts and these channels. And if you think of it kind of like an iceberg and how an iceberg calves off, pieces of ice calve off of an iceberg, this is exactly what happens. These gullies and arroyos are formed, and basically all the sediment just caves in and brings all of those rocks, boulders, trees. This is what's happening in the forest. This is what happened to the Schultz and what's happening right now with the museum fire. What did we do? Well, we went in, the county, we went in and we started restoring all of those gullies and those channels and started putting forest mitigation measures on the forest. We spent millions of dollars of doing that. This is where the museum fire is, and if you see all that blue, you'll see blue, red, green. It's hard to see this here, but basically the amount of water that's going to be coming into my neighborhood, the Sunnyside neighborhood, where we have a very diverse and high population of Latinos, is 3,000 cubic feet of water per second. If you've ever been at Lee's Ferry and the Grand Canyon, you see the Grand Canyon water that comes through Lee's Ferry, that's the amount of water that comes through. Imagine that coming through a neighborhood of 8,000 people, the most highly densely populated neighborhood in Flagstaff, Arizona, and in Coconino County. So even a small monsoon rain that we had caused this type of damage from the museum fire, the fire that I told you we had in July. And so what did we do? Well, we began to put sandbags, we began to put cement jersey barriers to protect people, their lives, and their property. And as mentioning my neighborhood, it's been historically a Hispanic neighborhood. It's our most diverse neighborhood, our most highly populated neighborhood. And if you think about it, we have a lot of people that built on the mountain, but then we have a whole community, my community, that built at the bottom of the mountain. And why? Because that used to be the county area, used to be farms and agriculture, and so people stayed there, they worked there, and they obviously stayed there and built their homes there. So what I basically want to say is that there is an economy from this forest restoration, this forest thinning. And we need to make sure that our community, the Latino community, is ready to be able to take part in this economy. There's going to be so many jobs from forest thinning, whether that be cutting the logs, whether it be the industries that are going to chip the wood and make forest products out of that wood. We need to be prepared to have a workforce that is ready and has the skill to be able to step into this type of workforce to promote the forest restoration economy. And so that's what we're trying to do. The county has been very engaged in working with the industry, very engaged in trying to reduce the red tape to be able to get industry to come in for the small diameter wood. Of course, doing it in a very sound environmental way. We've had everybody at the table to make sure that we understand that we're doing this in a way that's going to be conservation minded and environmentally friendly. And we also know that we need to do this because our forests are dying right now. And so we need to be able to remove this small diameter wood and make sure that it can be used for a good use. And we are really excited to be able to make this one of the main economic drivers in Coconino County. So I wanted to share that, that with you as a real case of what we're seeing with climate change up north with wildfires. But of course, you've heard about California, New Mexico, all the other states in the West that are experiencing this. And we have been asked actually by several other states to come and share our experience and what we did on the forest to try to mitigate the flooding to help other communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank Supervisor Archuleta for also joining us from northern Arizona. That was a long drive as well, so thank you so much. And you can tell this is truly a conversation among stakeholders statewide. According to the Environmental Defense Fund, Arizona has 3 of the top 10 fastest warming cities in the nation, so we are truly ground zero for this debate, and it's so exciting to hear that one of our communities is leading the way and a role model for other cities across the country based on the work that you're doing, so thank you for sharing that with us. So as we mentioned earlier, these climate change issues that you've been hearing about also present career and business opportunities for Latinos to get involved, all of you to get involved, business leaders, and of course to get involved in the green economy and clean energy sectors. We would now like to bring Victor Contreras from Chicanos por la Causa into this conversation. Victor is the Director of Workforce Solutions who is helping Latinos enter the clean energy workforce. Victor?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Rafael, I got to thank you. Last time I felt like this was when I did a presentation after the firemen at Career Day. Sitting here and listening to everybody and their knowledge and all these things, you think about, well, what the heck does Victor have to say about work and jobs and all that? But we have a lot to think about when we think about the future and what kind of system are we trying to create for our youth. I represent CPLC's Workforce Development Department, and what we really do is focus on connecting people to employment, and I take great pride in saying that we connect them as quickly as possible. The days of going to a job fair and showing up and saying go home and apply online, like that has to end. We have to help people get jobs right away because that's what they need. But as we started looking at workforce and peeling back the layers, we noticed that there were some great disparities in the workforce sector, and a lot of it boils down to a lack of educational opportunities. We've really focused on the Maryville community, which is only 4 miles west of this. Maryville starts. Think about it, 4 miles west of us. There's 500,000 people on 55.5 square miles. It's the most densely populated urban center in the Southwest. And only 9% of them have any type of college credential, 2-year degree, or 4-year degree. Only 9%. In fact, with every graduating class from high schools, you can probably actually count on 2 hands how many of those graduates will actually finish at ASU or U of A or NAU. Think about that. When we talk about the green economy, it doesn't include us. We might be the installers, we might have these little jobs here and there, but there's 1 million people in Arizona without a GED right now because we've given up. We're chasing the dream of the green economy, but we forgot all about all the people that are from the communities we live in. I was at a job fair yesterday in Las Vegas. CPLC has a presence there. I was at a job fair in Tucson this morning. I think a lot of us were in Tucson yesterday and today. And one of the things that we know from the data is that the youth that are now coming to our job fairs, 18, 19 years old, they're actually competing with their own parents for the same jobs. Because somehow along the way, our policymakers haven't gone back and said, well, if Maria's been working at this restaurant for 5 years, we should really help her get that GED so that she can move up and work at a call center, at a bank, or anything else. Green jobs, because there's a lot of those green jobs that are connected to the support side. But instead, what has happened is we've just let it go. And when we have GED classes, we do that on a monthly basis. People come in and we make it very affordable, $25, but we expect people to sit through a 16-week GED class to take a test that they can literally just walk into. Now, I can go to ASU and register for a master's degree course and get it done in 2 weekends. A master's degree MPA level course, and yet we expect people who are working, who have kids, who have transportation issues, we expect them to go to a 16-week course, and if they don't show up, or if they miss classes, more than 2 classes, are kicked out. How's that possible? How's that equitable? So I think when we look at workforce and we look at the future and the green economy, we really have to look at ourselves and what is it that we're asking our elected officials? What is it that we're demanding from our school systems, our colleges? Are we being courageous enough to challenge some of our allies and say you need to do better? A 9% success rate going into a 2-year degree doesn't work for me, especially when 500,000 people out in Maryville they just want that next opportunity, but we're not providing them. So I think when we talk about the solutions that we need to do from a workforce perspective, we really need to go back to the old school ways of case management, social services. There's no app, there's no software, there's no application that's going to save us when we have a lot of folks who are unemployed. We really just need to start the GED classes, the ESL classes. We need to start talking about taking our kids to community college campuses and introducing them to ASU and even the U of A, and especially NAU. We need to be talking about how can we connect people to career pathways not after they graduate from high school, but during high school. How do we connect them to the, I think there's a BLM program where kids can learn about conservation, actually go work in Flagstaff and do fire prevention stuff. That just came out. But think about it, that program just came out and it's only for 16 youth. It's like $500,000, 16 youth. That's absurd. I get funding through the city of Phoenix. My contract is to serve 200 youth for $500,000. 200 youth, and only 60 of those are new. The rest of them are rollovers. And I challenge my staff every day. I said, we got to serve 400 new youth in this year, plus the youth that we're exiting out. Because there's a fire, there's a house burning down, and we're not doing enough. So CPLC, as many of you know, is a very old organization. We're 50 years old. We shouldn't call ourselves old. We're an organization. We're a legacy brand. I really do think we're a legacy brand. But because of the leadership of David Adame, our president, I think we're really taking the step into the 21st century, where we're not okay with just having programs and saying, it's good enough. We really want to challenge the status quo, see where we can partner with organizations to advocate and even electioneer when possible, and support individuals who really get it. Unfortunately, a lot of times we give people a pass just because they're maybe Latino or they're brown or whatever. But I really think the future of Latinos is really to be courageous enough to step up and ask and demand things, not only from the people that might not agree with us, but also the people that agree with us. I will leave you with this thought. We have 1 million people without a GED, right? We had Tesla at one of our job fairs about 2 months ago, and the one thing they asked for was what? What do you think it was? You didn't need a college degree, but what did you need? A GED. How many people do you think the state of Arizona graduates with a GED per year? 10,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that's it. 1 million people at a GED, and we have 10,000 graduates per year. That should get us angry, right? Because we know education is the opportunity for empowerment, for success, for all those things that we want. We know that education helps us learn about social determinants and about healthcare and the environment and all those things that we complain about. It all starts with education, training, workforce. So those are my few thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks to our guests for their insights on how to engage diverse communities in the climate change movement. Let me tell y'all, I say it all the time, if we don't have a planet, there isn't much else to talk about. On our Stacking 20 segment, we want to pour out a few for the candidates that have dropped out of the Democratic presidential primary. It's been a lot of fun teasing my friends on social media, depending on where they're from in the country. asking them what we should pour out for their local elected official, who's our local presidential candidate for their community. So it's been fun identifying the Alaskan Ale for Mike Gravel, a Sonoma Rosé for Eric Swalwell, an Ice Harbor Lager for Jay Inslee, Sam Adams from Seth Moulton. We had the stomach sucking up on a Coors Light for John Hickenlooper, and now a good old Brooklyn Lager for Senator Christian Gellibrand. While almost 20 candidates still remain, incredibly enough, we were basically down to the final 10 who have qualified for the September 12th debates. The one-nighter will finally have Elizabeth Warren on the same stage as Joe Biden and give the boy band of Beto, Booker, Buttigieg, and Castro a chance to show they can stand up to all of the top contenders on the same stage. But we will still have an overcrowded stage of 10. So it's going to be hard for any of them to get their voice out there. You know, next week we're going to preview that debate much more in depth. But the key, not only for this debate coming up September, but really for the next few months leading up to the Iowa caucus in the beginning of 2020, is going to be, A, Biden's ability to maintain his polling lead or his national polling lead despite lukewarm support will be the key to this race. I mean, look, I love Joe. Don't get me wrong. I love the people he's empowered in the staff. I know many of his top staffers. They're fantastic. I thought his commercial around healthcare was excellent. But is anyone out there, honestly, like riding or die with Joe Biden? You may be supporting him, and there's nothing wrong with that. But is this sort of like lukewarm support, this mile-long support that's an inch thick? Can it last? Can he hold on to this lead? The other dynamic I think is going to be really important is will progressives coalesce behind Warren if they see she has a real shot to take the nomination? These are all really important questions we will get into as we get closer to the September 12th debates. You know, we love stacking our 20s here. We love following all these candidates. Tulsi Gabbard's back from her military service over the summer. Tom Steyer's still going to try to buy himself into the debates in October. Well, some of the other very credible candidates who just haven't caught fire, the Bennetts, the Bullocks, and others, will they stick around and see if they can try to find some space? And of course, hashtag Yang Gang is in the debates, baby. He's still in the mix. Thank you for joining Ray Collazo and our guests on today's Found in Translation talk show. And again, thanks for listening to WPPMLP 106.5 in Philadelphia, hashtag People Powered Radio. And of course, our podcast. Keep the conversation going on social media, at Ray's Podcast on Twitter, at Ray's Latino Talk on IG. And email me, podcastrays@gmail.com, podcastrays@gmail.com. I love to get the emails from you guys, and we'll shout out some new audience members of the week that we've identified on next week's episode. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend and have a fantastic day.